All right, hi everyone. Welcome to the last Friday transportation seminar of the term and the year. My name is Jenny Liu. I am a faculty member in Urban Studies and Planning, and I host this particular transportation seminar with my colleague, Dr. Avi Krishnan over at Civil Engineering. And today we're very happy to have Edgar Ruas come here and talk to us about his work on shared mobility in multifamily homes. And just a quick reminder for those of you who are enrolled in this class to make sure that you are turning in your written option if you are taking this class for a letter grade, and to also check on your questions and attendance when I pass that around today. All right, I'm going to turn the floor over to Edgar, and thank you.
Fine. No, I have. Yeah. Right. Thank you, Jenny. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning to everybody. My name is Edgar Ruas. As Jenny said, I am a finishing graduate student here in PSU in Engineering Transportation Department, and I'm happy to share with you today my thesis that I presented this week. So you have an enhanced version of that presentation thesis and an enhanced presenter also, because I know what's going good and bad, so I made it a little bit better for you. All right, and another thing, I'm not from the US, so my English perhaps it's not very good. But if you don't understand what I'm saying, look at my hands, because I shake it a lot. So I hope you can understand. All right, so the theme and on vehicle and transportation policy on vehicle ownership, an analysis of multifamily residents here in Portland, Oregon. And to begin, oops, okay, I will use this one. Oops. Okay, no. Don't worry, we are in good hands.
Okay. Here you go.
Great, thank you. So just a quick overview about what are we talking about. First, the background and objectives of the thesis is the literature review, what we have now about this theme in the literature, the methods, data, the findings, and finally a little bit of conclusions. And in the end, after that, we have questions and answers as usual in the Friday seminar. Well, a little bit of background. I like to start with some introduction from the general theme. Automobiles or cars have been shaping our society, especially the Western society, for now more than 100 years, since it was invented in Germany in the end of the 19th century. But with Ford and the assembly line, it really becomes something that everyone can have it. Like Ford said, you can have any car since it's black, for the assembly line and all the production, the mass production that affected not only how we move, but also how we consume and give way to a lot of different disciplines. And well, the car was in the beginning of the revolution, in the beginning of the 20th century. And in the middle of the 20th century, we have this, I like this picture here, and you said the people looking at the car as it was a person, people envying and looking. It became a member of the family. Every part of the American dream become having an automobile. It defines who you are, the ownership, and it's more than just a car. It's a part of the family for everybody, with all the consequences that has. It's not by chance that America today has 90% of people having, or there are more cars than people in the United States. So it's something that changed our society. And it's changing again. We are facing a new revolution. I think today it's a very exciting time for people in transportation, with all this shared economy emerging, which means that people are not owning things anymore. They are moving to sharing the ownership as Airbnb, as in other sectors. And the same is happening with cars. And cars...
Interrupt. Can I just adjust your microphone?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Don't worry.
There we go. All right, hopefully that's better. And
okay.
If not, we'll bring out the hand.
The hand, okay, don't worry.
All right, thank you. Right.
Okay, so, and the vehicles, again, in the center of this revolution that we're facing, the shared economy, and with technologies like Uber and rideshare, which I'll talk about later, car share. It's all happening, and the car is in the center. Even with autonomous vehicles, which is all the thing that we're hearing, again, the vehicles is on that transformation. So, what are we going to study? With all this introduction, we had a project here, of course, with my advisor, Kelly Clifton.
Sorry, that didn't work, so we're not
okay.
talking to here. Thank
no
you.
problem. I'll try to do my best here.
Great. And well, so coming again, what is the research, our research objective? What we try to understand, all these new technologies coming, the car sharing, the ride share, the shared mobility in general, that's the general term. We are combining this type of mobility services with vehicle ownership in residents of multifamily housing and residents owning parking and transit passes. What's the importance of that? Many cities, and Portland in specific, they are trying to reduce parking requirements for in the city center, in regions with higher density, with transit availability, and in a way to induce other types of mobility in order to also reduce the cost of housing. Because parking is a driver of housing costs when you have minimum parking requirements. And combining these minimum parking requirements with shared mobility could be a nice strategy, because shared mobility, in essence, reduces vehicle ownership. That's what we are going to show here. And reduced parking, you reduce your vehicle ownership, you don't have the costs, or you don't have the I won't say problem, because it's not a problem to park your car, but reduced parking, you have to find another way to park your car. Perhaps giving up of ownership could help reduce, or the cities to obtain this higher objective, which is reduce housing costs. So, in a summary, trying to summarize what I said, we are using these variables, shared mobility, parking availability, and transport demand management programs like Transit Pass, all of this to try to model vehicle ownership. Well, and what has been studied about this subject before? Vehicle ownership, there's a large body of literature about it. There has been studies, at least since the 50s, more scientific studies about it. And the major conclusions of that is the major influences of vehicle ownership are socio-demographics, like income, household size, number of kids in the house, and also built environment. This is more recent, but also it's important, like the 4Ds, the 5Ds, 7Ds, 8Ds, whatever you want. They also influence the vehicle ownership, I would say later, but they influence less than the social demographics. What is kind of intuitive, if you have one person in your household, it don't make sense to have two vehicles, but you have 2 or 3 or 4, then it's a big influence in the vehicle ownership. It's kind of intuitive. Well, parking requirements, it's also a little bit of controversy about that. And I think the discussion about parking requirements started more heated when with productions of Donald Shoup, that's the seminal book, The High Cost of Free Parking, and all the influence the parking has in all the city we have and all our urban environment. And what is that, the parking requirements? Almost every city you have, not here in the US, but around the world, in land zoning codes, you have minimum parking requirements that oblige, or the real estate developers, they have to provide a minimum number of parking for the cars. And well, this incentive people to buy cars because they have a free space to park, and that creates a huge consequences all over the cities. So cities are trying to remove these minimum requirements to people not have much cars, and try to use alternative modes, and as shared mobility or whatever, transit in general. But there's not much studies about that, about parking requirements, because it's difficult to study, and the cities that remove the minimum parking are very recent sometimes. And there's an interesting study about New York, but for single houses, that the conclusion of the study was that for every 11 cars, 1 car is due to free parking, because people can park the car on the streets for free, because they can use their garage as a new room when they take the car and park on the street, so increase the value of the house. So there's many strategies that people use for the free parking that seems free, but in the end it's not. And of course, it increases the prices of construction, because you could use the parking area for more housing, or you could not build it at all and would be more cheaper to build the buildings. And for our work here, shared mobility means, I think it's important to know, I haven't said that yet. Shared mobility means car share, which is this car-to-go model that you can pick up the car, you make a membership and pay a fee and use the car, and then you can drop it either, I'll talk about that in the future, one way or two way. The ride share, that it's Uber or Lyft, this kind of modern taxi model, and bike share. But bike share, I won't talk very much, because our sample was not very significant with bike share, as also Bike Town started, I think, in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. I have that, and our sample was in 2017. So it's kind of a not very long time. Other than that, car share started in 2002, so there's a more long period. Oh, yeah, and important to say that shared mobility in other studies were all identified as the main users of shared mobility, high educated millennials and residents of urban areas, more dense areas. Of course, that's where the shared mobility is offered most today. You can use Uber in the suburbs mainly, but it's not as easy as in the city center. Well, a little bit more about shared mobility. As I was saying, car share can be one way, which is car-to-go, that you can pick a car here and drop it off anywhere where you want, or two ways, a zip car, that you rent a car here, and you must return the car in the same place that you pick it up. So there are two different business models. The two-way are more recent. The one-way is more recent than the two ways. And the car share studies show that users in general, like for between 20 and 30% of users of car share has gotten rid of one vehicle that they owned previously. So it's a significant amount of reduction. Well, bike share has also been associated with lower vehicle ownership, but the numbers are smaller, but like 2% or 3% of users of bike share has gotten rid of one car too. And rideshare also, people that use rideshare tend to have less vehicles than average, and they are multimodal. They try to use other modes as well. However, some recent studies, because it's difficult to have data on rideshare, because the Uber and Lyft, the companies are very picky and they are very protecting their data. So there's not much data to share, available to researchers. So the research is just now starting with cities that are forcing them to share some data. But and these cities have shown that people from rideshare are using were previously using transit. So rideshare is kind of not decisive, but they are taking people from transit. Okay, let's go now to methods, how our research was structured. We did a survey here in Portland for residents of multifamily housing, so apartments, not single homes, and all of the, I'll show you where they were. And we had a strategy of selecting buildings with regular parking, with minimum parking, and buildings that had some types of reduced parking. That can be buildings built before the Second World War, where there were no cars for everybody, so they had no parking and still are here with no parking. And other buildings that more recently that were built in near transit lines, so they were allowed to build with less parking. And also some buildings that if they had a car share park inside the building, they could reduce the number of parking spots offered, like from the minimum parking. For example, if I build one dedicated car share or for zip car, for example, in my building, I could remove 10 parking spots. That's thing that's doing important. I think there are some buildings like that, but Seattle and San Francisco are doing that for more time than here. And so we selected these 2 buildings with the help of the Portland city here. And we select buildings that had regular parking to compare both results. And we sent to 300 buildings, but we got back only 170 buildings answers from that. And a response rate, as you have seen, not the best, but in line with other researches that have been done, around 4.5. And we have 480 valid responses from the total that we sent. Oh, in the period of June to September of last year. These are the locations of the buildings. You can see they are most central buildings here in Portland, mostly along transit corridors too. The purple ones are the ones that we got answers back, and the yellow ones are the ones that we did not get answers back. So it's a pretty mixed sample. Now let's look what we got from all these people. Some interesting characteristics. We try to know people with 0 vehicles. Who are they? Who are these people? And in general, they tend to be single person and male. They have less income than other categories of people. They are not working. This was important. Our sample had a larger amount of people not working, either because they were retired or disabled. So they can be not working or working close or living close to their work, like the distance to work less than 2 miles. Our sample had a large amount of people with BA, with bachelor's degree or higher, like 80% of the sample had bachelor's degree or higher. But people living alone has a higher probability of not owning a BA or not having a graduate degree. They live in higher density areas. Here I mean employment and residential density. They own a transit pass and they use more shared mobility than the households with more than 1 vehicle. And they use significantly more than this is the general average for the other people with more than 1 vehicle and people with 0 vehicles here. And also rideshare, they use more. Another interesting characteristic, which type of mobility services, as we call them, are they using? You can see that this is for the general sample, not for 0 household. This is for all of the 480 people that responded. You can see that people have almost 60% of our sample are rideshare members. We asked them, are you a rideshare member? And they say yes. And this is high because there's no cost to be a rideshare member. Everybody can download. Of course, the cost is only having a smartphone. If you don't have a smartphone, you can call Uber. So almost 60% of our sample had membership of rideshare, more than Transit Pass. Transit Pass, we was the second, was like not even 40%. And bike share was the least one, of just a little bit above 10%. But an interesting thing, car share members are using car share more than rideshare members. This can show, we hypothesize that people that are car share members, they do it more rationally, because to be a car share member, you have to pay and you have to have a driver's license. Not everybody can be a member of car share. So people who, and perhaps they make the calculation of how much it would cost and everything, and people that are car share members, they use it more than rideshare members. And again, the 0 vehicle household are using the most, both of them, either car share and rideshare. 3.7 car share, only members. This is only for members. And about the car share services, which are the services that are being used? As I said, the Zipcar or two-way car share started before in 2007 here in Portland, and Car2Go started in 2012. But you can see here that Car2Go and Reach Now, which is the one way, they have much more members than the other types of services, and they use much more than Zipcar or Get Around, or that are the only one-way car share. And who has both services, Zipcar or Car2Go, they use the most, like 4.2 times per month they use the car share services. This is again like a sample for who is using the shared mobility in general. People that use, this is no use, and more than once is people that use at least once per month ride share or car share. Okay, they're both here combined, and some characteristics of the people that are using this the service. And all these variables here we tested for ANOVA, like to see if the means are different, and they are all different. So there is a significant difference between the two users. And people that use shared mobility more than once, they own less cars. You can see the average here is 0.7 cars in the household, and people that do not use 0.8. They are younger, people that use car share, shared mobility, 33 years against 42 years. In spite of, it's interesting that there's a guy with 74 years old that use car share. So it's not only the young that use it, but we had a sample of 88 years of people that answered that. So, and it's a web-based survey. So people use the internet even with 88 years. So it's interesting. And this is employment density. People also that use shared mobility lived in areas with more employment density higher, and they have higher income. This is income. The people who use, I forgot this, much easier. They also have a higher income. Other characteristics, people that use, there's a higher probability of male using shared mobility. You see the proportion here, female is much larger than male, in that no use, but that difference is smaller for shared mobility. People with shared mobility also have transit passes available. They are more multimodal, as we find in the literature review. We are confirming that. And this is another thing. They live in denser areas, so the distance to work is much. They tend to work closer to where they live. Okay, this is a general overview about the sample that we find interesting, and now the model, what the findings that we had. We took the data, we tried to model what we found, and to understand, especially the interactions and who is using, and try to help the cities or whatever. I will show you that later. And to model vehicle ownership, we were in doubt between an ordered model or a non-ordered model, we can say. And we choose a multinomial logistic, like a discrete choice model, to try to identify the household vehicle ownership. 0, 1, 2 or more vehicles. That were the cases. And we started with one model, with this multinomial discrete choice model, with social demographic attributes and built environment attributes. That was the literature until very recently. We added transportation policy attributes as a second model to try to understand the power of what the goodness of fit of the explanation of the second model. Transportation policy is frequency of car share use, availability of parking or not, and a third model that we would interact the frequency of shared mobility use with socioeconomic and built environment attributes to see the influence of that. Just quickly showing you some goodness of fit measures of the three models. We can see that the inclusion of transportation policy increased the explanatory power of the model from model 1 to model 2. These are the pseudo R-square that measure this kind of the power of explanatory of the model. But model 3 also increases the explanatory power, but as we increase a lot of variables with the interactions, it penalizes a little bit if you use these two criteria, BIC or AIC. It penalizes the model which includes a lot of variables. So for planning purposes or for cities in general, trying to model that, model 2 would be enough. But as we are exploring the variables and the interactions between shared mobility and social demographics, we are using model 3 here in the future analysis for everybody. to understand better. I'll get there. You see, it's a bit confusing, but I'll try to be more concise. These are the model results. These are the coefficients for each of the variables that we found significant to input in the model. I will not go into detail because it would be boring, but I'll give you the highlights. Wherever is green means that comparing to the base case, which is 0 vehicles, I'll show an example with income. The probability of owning 1 vehicle is higher than owning 0 vehicles as we increase income. Okay, this is valid for all the variables here. Where you see green means an increased probability of owning 1 or 2 vehicles comparing to 0 vehicles, which is the base case. 0 is our base case. If you see two minus or plus, means that it's higher than the other. And if it's white, it means it's not significant. What draws our attention here? Age. For example, it means that if you have more than 35 years, there is a less chance of you owning 2 vehicles comparing to 0 vehicles. This is not what the literature says. The literature says that younger people tend to own less vehicle than older people. And this is showing, our sample shows the opposite, that older people has less vehicles than younger people. It's something that we must study more deeply. We are just hypothesizing why that could be happening, but we do not have a conclusive answer. Our hypothesis is that people living in this type of apartment are perhaps, they recently joined together, perhaps they married in a short period of time and both had cars, and they still have not decided to get rid of 1 car before 35 years old. But that's just a hypothesis. We need to look further in this type of data. Transportation policy, the same logic. And here what draws our attention is the monthly user car share. Here is saying that if you use more car share, you have more chances of owning 2 or more vehicles than 0 vehicles. This is also counterintuitive because we are saying that car share probably reduces vehicle ownership, but this happens only when we add the interactions. The interactions has a larger effect than this one. So it's still car share use reduces vehicle ownership. But for this case here, we also had to look deeper in that, but our hypothesis is that to use car share, you have to have a license. And about 20% of our sample, people are not able to drive. So when you take the effect of income and education that we'll see later, these kinds of give a positive effect because we are only comparing people here that can drive with people that do not have cars that cannot drive. So it creates this positive effect, but that's just an hypothesis too. But as you can see, rideshare, it's pretty negative. And here are the interactions that we tested. This was the core of the work. We wanted to see if people using more than the income effect in car share and education, in car share and rideshare. And as you can see here, income is very, people with higher income tend to use more rideshare and tend to own less vehicle, confirming also the literature that we found that people with more income tend to use more shared mobility. And people with higher education, the same. But that's a bit confusing to understand this kind of models. We try to do some scenarios to be more clear, to show how the behavior of shared mobility, how it influences the vehicle ownership, and also to find out a kind of how much shared mobility use per month would be proper to reduce vehicle ownership or to maintain lower levels of vehicle ownership. And we tested some scenarios, but I'll show you just one scenario. This is, we pick a scenario, we call this newly married scenario, but it's like a person with income between 50 to 75,000, 2 persons in the household, bachelor's degree, less than 35, has a transit pass, and work between 2 to 10 miles. This is a pretty normal and common Portland residence for multifamily. And what do we see here? This is the probability of owning 0, 1, or 2 or more vehicles. And this is the share mobility use. You read this share mobility use as half car share, half ride share. So for example, when you see 4 share mobility use, that means 2 car share use per month and 2 ride share use per month. And as you can see here, if we use just like 0.5 shared mobility use per month, the probability of you owning 2 or more vehicles and 1 vehicle is the same. Just a little bit of shared mobility use decreases a lot the probability of 2 vehicles. And if you use between 2.5 and 4.5 shared mobility per month, you have also the 2 and 0 are the same. And the probability of owning just 1 vehicle goes higher than 80%. So a little incentive to use shared mobility can have a huge effect in vehicle ownership decisions. Going a little bit deeper in the same profile, this is just for 2 vehicles. This is the probability for 2 vehicles. I'm varying a lot of things here. I'm varying income and I'm varying parking also availability. And we can see here, forget the other colors, it's just they are just nice, but not very good to see and to understand. But focus on this 2, which is middle income. And you can see here with 0 share mobility, the effects of parking availability in the probability of owning 2 vehicles. For the same income level, almost double. If you remove parking from the building, the probability of not owning a vehicle reduces a lot. And if we increase shared mobility, you can see that after 5 to 6 here, if you take the yellow and the gray line, they are the same. So the effects of share mobility for this income level equals the effects of having parking or not. It's a bit complicated, but for only this type of income. The other income, they will cross, like you have to use a lot of share mobility to equal both the effects of parking. But not all shared mobility are equal. You have car share and you have ride share. This is a composition. We are taking ride share and car share together. If we look only at ride share, we can see that the effects are not that great as the car share effect. You see the parallel lines here? And you reduce around 10%. If you use 6 times per month ride share, you reduce, in general, for all of them, like 10% the probability of owning 2 vehicles, which is something, but not very much. Car share is much more effective in reducing vehicle ownership than ride share. The effect here is not as great as car share. And we did a second analysis. This was a scenario like an individual, analysis the probability of this individual. And we asked, what if we changed for all individuals in our sample? We do a disaggregate analysis for everybody. We change some characteristics and then aggregate everything to see how the sample will respond to that. So we use the model for estimate the vehicle ownership, the household vehicle ownership. And our model predicted that 1.08 would be the average vehicle ownership for the whole sample. The observed, or the real one, was 1.06. This was what's in the sample. So it's kind of okay. I think it's pretty okay. And these are the distribution for 0 vehicle, 1 vehicle, and 2 or more vehicles. So the last majority with 68%, which is pretty accurate too. The current is almost like that. So what did we do? First, we doubled the activity density, meaning that for each individual, we doubled the value of employment density and residential or people density to see the effects of a built environment variable. If we double that, how much would that affect in our model the vehicle ownership? And we can see here that we increased the number of households with 0 vehicle and decreased from 1 vehicle. For 2 or more vehicle household, it wasn't very much the effect. and we reduced 4% the total number of cars. Our second scenario, we removed parking from all the sites. Everybody that had parking, which was 70% of our sample had parking, we removed and see what happened. And we can see here that removing parking is much more effective for people with 2 or more vehicles. You see that they reduced 12% the number of households with 2 or more vehicles and increased the one from 1 vehicle. But from 1 to 0, there's not much difference in people that they just get rid of 1 car, but not all the cars. And also we reduced more the number of cars, like 8% the number of cars per household. And the third scenario, we changed the share mobility use. We put everybody to, which the average of the sample was 0.6 use of car share per month. We changed that to 2.8, which is the average use of members of car share. And we did the same for ride share. The average of the sample was 1.7 times ride share per month. We changed that to 2.5. And we can see there was the greatest shift in vehicle ownership. And also we reduced from 2 to 1 and reduced from 1 to 2. To 1 to 0, sorry. We reduced both sides here of the table. And we just tried the last one that we combine all the scenarios. Like if a city did everything, we reduced like more than 1/3 of the vehicle ownership, and all the categories were changed. People reduced, every category reduced the vehicle ownership. So what that means, what's the summary of that, all that I have said? We found that car share is negatively associated with vehicle ownership, especially for people with 2 or more vehicles. They reduce that more than 1 to 0. Rideshare was not as clearly associated with reducing vehicle ownership, despite the reduction is not as strong as is car share. And parking availability, also confirming also the literature, has a strong effect on vehicle ownership, but also reducing from 2 to 1. If you have 1 vehicle, having or not parking makes no difference. Perhaps because it's easy to find parking in the street for 1 vehicle, but not for 2. But that's not as effective as reducing from 1 to 2. So, and the conclusions that we get. We found that shared mobility is an important tool to reduce vehicle ownership. However, is not as effective, or not the effects of income, of household size, distance to work, and transit pass ownership, and even parking are stronger than shared mobility, but it still is an important tool. And it's a good tool if you combine with other measures like parking and giving transit passes. It's a good complementary measure. This is an important thing I think I forgot to mention before. We studied association. We didn't study causality. I will talk about that more in the limitations, but we are not finding the causality of things with just association. So it does not mean also that we are reducing VMT use. We are just seeing vehicle ownership of the cars. And a suggestion that can be done to the cities for shared mobility is, when you have a new technology like electric vehicles, when you want the public to change, it's very much difficult if everyone to change. If you have like a shared mobility provider, and if you want to enforce a new technology, and supposedly everybody uses car share, uses not your own car, it's much easier to enforce that with one company than with everybody. So in the future, when we have new technologies, if you have one company providing all the vehicles, to change the fleet is much easier. And it's a first step into autonomous vehicles world, like reducing vehicle ownership. Perhaps autonomous vehicle, people are not able to pay for one, but we can use one, and that will affect where we live and the buildings. Well, limitations, as I said before, it's a cross-section survey. It's not longitudinal, so I can establish causality. If they have shared mobility, they gave up of cars. We can't say that. We just see the association. It's applicable for multifamily housing for the Portland region, not for single homes, not for the suburbs. That was not the focus of this study. It's the travel behavior for just one member of the house. It was not made for all the respondents, all the house. They can have different, and that can influence the decisions. And a future work would be to expand to vehicle usage, to the VMT, to know you can get rid of the car, but you do not stop using the car. And that's something that cities are also interested to. And now I think I'm open for questions. Thank you. But yeah.
If you could pass the microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
So just had a question for did you guys look at vehicle ownership total? Because it's going to take, if you're going to increase your rideshare, car share, those fleets are vehicles too on the roadway. So did you guys look at any difference in if we're increasing rideshare, are we decreasing overall fleet size across private and shared ownership, or?
No.
Okay.
No, we didn't look at the fleet of rideshare or car share. We just looked at household ownership. We have the individual and the household ownership. So that we were worried that individuals might not own personally a car, but they have access in the household. So we have these two figures here in the survey.
What questions might you ask on a future study, or how might you structure a future study to help establish any causality? So to help establish causality, so this is just association. So in a future study, what would you do to help establish causality?
Well, I would say perhaps it's not the best answer, I don't know, but to my knowledge, I think I would do a longitudinal study. I would have to perhaps select a group of people or similar people, or follow them through a while, or do a quasi-pain. The pronunciation is kind of hard for me, but quasi-painel, I think. When I ask people, what were you doing last year? What are you doing now? What will you do in the next year if that happens? Perhaps using these two types of techniques, depending on resources availability, to do this type of research, to have this kind of causality more. That would be interesting.
Thanks. Thank you, Edgar. That was really interesting. I was wondering a little bit about the spatial distribution of your respondents and how you think the spatial distribution of where people decide to live and how available car share availability might be affecting their usage or participation in the programs.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing. All the sample are in the coverage area of Car2Go. Not all, but 95% are in the coverage area of Car2Go. Some buildings, but we were expecting more. But I think from the 170 that we got answered, 2 or 3 they had car share in the building, like a part of Zipcar or Car2Go. There's one that I included. We visit that it's near the OHSU, that they have 3 spots, a new building, 3 spots for Car2Go. We had seen for Zipcar, but they have especially for Car2Go, which is really nice. They say the car is never there, but it's there. But I think only 3 they had this kind of car share available in the building, but all of the others were in the region of Car2Go. And sorry, what else was the other?
Yeah. Thank you. So just to clarify, I guess the spatial distribution of, say, every area in the Car2Go region is not equal. So some areas have more dense availability of Car2Go cars, and then further out east, you have lesser availability. Did you look at kind of the availability or the density of car share versus usage?
Yeah. Sorry, now I get it. No, we didn't. We didn't look at specifically availability, and we discussed that, and we considered that frequency of use is a demand kind of variable. It's not a supply, but we are using that also as a proxy to supply, kind of identify how much the offer or the supply of car share is also based on the frequency of car use, and we decided to go with this type of variable. But we didn't look specifically at how much the density of car sharing is in the area. No.
There you go. Thanks for using the microphone.
Sure. So I guess what I was wondering is kind of a piggyback in some ways, because it's sort of a locational thing. I feel like there is this issue of equity where those places, a lot of times they're being priced up. They have these new buildings, certain rents are very high. So could you tell a little bit about your income distribution and how that might have affected your results of sort of this self-selection set that can buy into this kind of lifestyle and others can't?
Yeah, sure. No, that's interesting. We had a very detailed information about income, but we ended up grouping in 3 levels only, because that were the significant levels of income. And our sample had almost 50% of our sample were earning less than $50,000. And this is the individual, not the household. We didn't ask the household. We asked only for the individual. And 90% of our sample were with a household living with 2 or less people. Also, 50% was just 1 person, and 40% were 2-person households, and 10% were 3 or more person living. So the income is back to income. Less than 50,000 was the 50% of the household earned less than 50,000. We had a high amount of retired or disabled people not working, like 30% of our sample. And we excluded from our sample all the it was all open market, open for all buildings. There were no buildings for special people, no buildings for like elders. No, was open for all. And even though we had like some buildings that retired and disabled, and they had like a higher age, and these people, they do not use shared mobility, and they earn less. That there was this correlation with them, and really they didn't use it. Was higher income people that use shared mobility in general.
Yeah, please do.
Which is, so your whole sample, which included people that use these services, people that didn't. So were there many low-income people that were using these shared mobility services?
No.
Okay, even though they were half the whole sample,
Yeah.
most of those fell into the side of not using. Yeah. Because maybe they were located in these areas that didn't.
Yeah, we don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry. We don't know if because of the location or not, but there's clear association with income with using shared mobility. They were not using, or if they were using, was not a high amount. But there was we can say because of the location, but we didn't got this, but income for sure.
Hello. My question, so again, you were looking at more association versus causality, and I'm curious if in your questionnaire anything was covered over the reasoning why people would choose one method over another. Like say, like you were saying, with a lot of new buildings, there's fewer parking spots or people have to pay more. It'd be interesting to see if any of those push people more towards rideshare, or, I don't know, is that something you guys covered, or?
Yeah, no, we didn't cover this. We didn't ask exactly this, but doing our research for that, we found some. It was not a scientific paper. It was more like a article, but people saying that rideshare can be 25% cheaper than using. Oh, sorry, not that. Americans, 25% of Americans could commute cheaper by rideshare than by private car. So yeah, and yeah, I think we didn't cover that. That answered the question.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was just curious, now that you've gone through it and you've analyzed all this data, and if there was another student who's going to build off from this, after analyzing, what variables would you advise that student or that researcher to focus on, just based on the results?
Yeah, I think this more qualitative questions, I think this is would be more interesting to know. But one thing that I kept thinking about, that I couldn't compare the costs of car share and ride share. Like, for example, for we could do a tool to calculate and compare both, and also a private car. I think if you compare the cost in general and make a curve of like what is interesting to use this or that, and in what circumstances, perhaps with, I think that would be an interesting thing that make me click. Oh, perhaps because my feeling is that car share is cheaper than ride share for you to use, like for a trip, if you can use it, of course, because you have to be able to drive to use car share and have to be available. But my feeling is that it's cheaper. But that's also my feeling. I couldn't prove this. That's, I think, it would be an interesting comparison to do. Like,
so your sample size came from multifamily buildings, and this is, I'm asking for your opinion. It's a causality question, but do you think that the multifamily buildings attract people who are more likely to not own a car, or do you think the people move into the buildings and then decide, like, once they get acclimated to maybe the denser development area, then they give up the car? Like, I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't have a car, so if I was apartment shopping today, I would not be interested in paying the premium for a parking space. I would want, I don't want to pay for that thing I'm not going to use. So which comes first, in your opinion?
well, there's lots of study trying to study that and figure it out. But my personal opinion, I think, talking about myself, of course, we have habits, we have and when we change, is a great opportunity for you to change your habits too, because you are facing a new place and everything. And I think that car companies do a much better advertisement or convincing job than non-car models do to convince you to use it. Because it's very good to use a car. It's very easy, very comfortable, and very cheap. But to use a bus, when you have a car, to change to a bus or change to a bike, you have to be very convinced that you want to change that. So, and there's no, I think the advertisement or the convincing of the people of doing that, because, okay, it's good for the environment, but at the end in the pocket, it will be sometimes expensive or not. But I don't know. I think car companies do a marketing much better than the other models do. And that makes it much harder to change your habit, because I'm okay. I know this, it's easier. And I don't know, perhaps the new generation with this kind of and changing ownership, which is not more ownership that car companies did very well to put this. No, you have to own your car. Now it's changing, it's using the car. Perhaps the next generation will grow with this thing in their heads, and they will give up vehicle, and it will be easier to change for build. But back to the first question about the self-selection thing, I think yes, a lot of people go to buildings with no parking because they already want no parking, or they are decided that they do not need the parking because they have this habit before, or they are transportation specialists and they know the thing, so they are looking for that. But yeah.
A few slides back, you had a chart of, I believe it was probability of owning more than 2 cars, and then income levels and parking availability. It looked like the behavior of the low and high income was more similar to each other than to the middle. This is another opinion question, but could you speculate or hypothesize on why that is? Normally we'd expect in the middle is in the middle, and the extremes are.
Yeah, that's just a good thing about the model, that we can capture these nuances with the discrete choice. It's not like a linear or continuous. You have this kind of niches, but it's really hard to say. We didn't look through it, this kind of comparison. They look similar, of course, they look similar, but yeah, I can't say why. It's just like, yeah, no, I can't say why that happened. We have to look more careful on that. Yeah.
What happened is that the 2 car owners became 1 car owners, and the 1 car owners became 0, and so the people in the middle ended up, the percentage stayed the same. There were actually a big shell game going on, and the middle people stayed the same. Does that make sense?
It can be.
So they shifted down, and so it looked like the percentage of 1 car owners were the same, but they were different owners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, but I have to look better in the scenarios and change the simulation for that.
So the presentation shows, and the study shows that that being elderly and disabled severely affects your shared mobility usage, like decreases a lot, combined with lower income. How much less does a elderly disabled person with lower income use shared mobility than just an elderly disabled person with medium or high income, would you say?
That's an interesting question. We haven't looked at it. I'll have to look more at the data, but it's totally plausible to answer that. We have the information, but I haven't looked in detail. Later can email me. We can give you the answer to that. But now I don't know how to answer, but surely I can look at it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.